Chosen one, there is a reason you are here right now. Not by accident, not by luck, not by random chance. Something greater has aligned this exact moment for you. Out of all the things you could be doing, out of all the places you could be, you are here, hearing this message. And that matters more than you think. Many people move through life believing everything happens randomly. They think moments like this mean nothing. Just another video, just another message, just another voice speaking into the noise of the world. But in the spiritual realm, moments like this are rarely random. Sometimes God uses simple things to reach us at the exact time we need it most. Maybe you were scrolling without thinking. Maybe you clicked without expecting anything special, but heaven knew this moment would come. Heaven knew the day, the hour, and the condition of your heart when you would hear these words. And right now, something is beginning to shift. You may not see it yet. You may not fully understand it yet, but something inside you is waking up. Something that has been quiet for a long time. Something that has been waiting for the right moment. The Bible speaks about moments like this. In Habakkuk 2:3 it says, "For the vision is yet for an appointed time. Though it seems slow, wait for it. It will surely come." This verse reveals something powerful about the way God works. God does not move randomly. He works through appointed times, specific moments, exact seasons that are prepared long before we ever see them. Sometimes the promise feels delayed. Sometimes the vision feels far away. Sometimes people wait for years, wondering when things will finally change. You may have felt that way yourself. Maybe you have prayed and wondered why the answer has not come yet. Maybe you have tried to move forward but felt like something was holding you back. Maybe you have felt stuck in a place where nothing seems to move. But what feels like delay is not always delay. Often it is preparation. God prepares the moment before He reveals the purpose. He prepares the person before He releases the calling. And many times the waiting season is the place where strength is built, faith is tested, and character is shaped. Think about the people in Scripture. Joseph waited years before the dream God gave him finally came true. David was anointed king long before he ever sat on the throne. Moses spent decades in the wilderness before leading a nation. At the time, it probably felt confusing. It probably felt slow. It probably felt like nothing was happening. But God was preparing the appointed time. And when that moment came, everything changed quickly. Doors opened that could not be forced open before. Paths appeared that did not exist before. Strength rose inside them that they did not know they had. That is the nature of an appointed moment. For a long time, it feels quiet. For a long time, it feels slow. But when the moment finally arrives, things begin to move in ways that cannot be stopped. And that is the message being spoken here. Your time is not random. Your life is not random. The things you have walked through, the struggles you have faced, the moments that shaped you, none of them were meaningless. Even the seasons that felt empty were building something inside you. There is something within you that did not come from the world around you. It was not taught in school. It was not passed down by people. It was placed inside you by God Himself, a purpose, a calling, a fire that cannot easily be explained. Maybe you have felt it before in quiet moments, a sense that you were made for something more, a feeling that your life has meaning beyond what you can see right now. Sometimes that feeling is easy to ignore. Life becomes busy. Responsibilities grow. The world becomes loud, and slowly that inner voice becomes quieter. But it never disappears completely, because what God places inside someone does not vanish. It waits. It waits for the moment when the heart is ready to hear again. And many times that moment comes in unexpected ways, through a message, through a conversation, through a moment of stillness where something deep inside finally wakes up again. Right now may be one of those moments for you, not because these words are special by themselves, but because God often uses simple words to awaken deeper truths. The truth is this: you were never created by accident. Before your first breath, God already knew your name. Before your first step, God already saw your path. Before you ever questioned your purpose, heaven had already prepared it. You may not see the whole picture yet. You may still have doubts. You may still have questions. You may still feel unsure about what lies ahead. That is normal. Most people in the Bible did not feel ready when their moment arrived. They felt small. They felt unprepared. They felt like someone else would be better for the task. But God rarely chooses people who feel ready. He chooses people who are willing, because willingness opens the door for something greater to move through a person. Right now, the invitation is simple. Pause for a moment. Listen beyond the noise. Ask yourself one honest question. What if this moment is not random? What if the season you are entering is the one God has been preparing you for? What if the waiting season is ending and the appointed time is beginning? You do not have to understand everything yet. You do not have to see every step ahead. But sometimes the most important thing a person can do is simply recognize the moment they are standing in. And this moment may be one of those turning points. The beginning of something awakening. The beginning of something aligning, the beginning of the appointed time that was written long before you knew it existed. So, take a breath. Open your heart, because something inside you has been waiting for this moment, and the appointed time has arrived. Chosen one, your story did not begin the day you were born. It did not begin the first time you opened your eyes or took your first breath. Your story began long before that moment. Long before your name was spoken on earth, it was already known in heaven. The Bible reveals this truth in Jeremiah 1:5, where God says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart." Think about what that really means. Before your body existed, God already knew who you were. Before your parents ever met each other, before anyone imagined your life, heaven had already seen you. Your life was never an accident. Your existence was never random. You were known. You were planned. You were intentionally created. Many people spend years wondering why they are here. They ask questions like, what is my purpose? Why was I born? What am I supposed to do with my life? But this verse answers the question in a powerful way. Your life was not a mistake that happened by chance. It was a decision made by God Himself. And not only were you known, you were also set apart. To be set apart means to be chosen for something specific. It means your life carries a purpose that is different from the ordinary path many people follow. God did not simply create you and send you into the world without direction. He placed a calling over your life before your journey even began. This truth explains something many people struggle to understand about themselves. Maybe you have felt different from others for most of your life. Maybe you have noticed that certain things never satisfied you the way they seemed to satisfy everyone else. While others were comfortable following the crowd, something inside you kept pulling you in another direction. Maybe you tried to fit in. Maybe you tried to think the way others think or live the way others live. But no matter how hard you tried, something always felt slightly out of place. Something always reminded you that you were not meant to blend into the background. That feeling can be confusing. Sometimes it even feels lonely. People might misunderstand you. They might question your choices or your beliefs. They might wonder why you see the world differently or why certain things matter so deeply to you. But what if that difference is not a problem? What if that difference is actually a sign? A sign that your life was meant to follow a path that others cannot always see. When God sets someone apart, it often creates a tension between them and the world around them. The world may encourage comfort, safety, and following the majority. But a calling from God often pushes a person towards something greater. That inner tension is not weakness. It is direction. It is the quiet voice reminding you that your life was designed with purpose. Many people ignore that voice. They silence it with distractions, routines, and expectations from others. But when someone begins to listen to it, something begins to change inside them. They begin to see their life differently. Instead of asking why they feel different, they begin to understand that the difference is part of their assignment. Instead of feeling lost, they begin to recognize that their journey is simply unfolding in its own time. Being set apart does not mean life will always be easy. In fact, it often means the opposite. The people God calls frequently walk through seasons of growth, challenge, and preparation that others may not understand. But those seasons shape the strength needed for the purpose ahead. Think about the people God called in Scripture. Jeremiah himself felt unqualified when God spoke to him. Moses doubted his ability to speak. David was overlooked by his own family, yet every one of them had something in common. God knew them before their journey began, and God set them apart for a purpose that only they could fulfill. The same truth applies to you. The restlessness you sometimes feel may not be confusion. It may be the sign of a calling waiting to be discovered. The sense that your life carries meaning beyond the ordinary may not be imagination. It may be the quiet reminder that your story was written with intention. God does not create people without purpose. Every life carries a reason. Every heart carries a design. Every person carries something that the world needs. You may not yet see the full picture of what that purpose looks like. Most people do not see it clearly at first. Purpose often reveals itself step by step as a person begins to trust the direction God places before them. But the foundation of that purpose is already clear. You are known before you were born. You were set apart before your journey began. And the life you are living now is part of a story that heaven saw long before you ever stepped into it. Chosen one. There is something important you need to understand about the way God works. God does not always place great power in places that look impressive. In fact, many times He does the opposite. He places something extraordinary inside something that looks completely ordinary. The Bible explains this clearly in 2 Corinthians 4:7. But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us. Think about the picture this verse creates. A jar of clay is simple. It is common. It is fragile. In ancient times, clay jars were everywhere. They were not expensive or rare. They could crack easily. They could break if dropped. No one looked at a clay jar and thought it was powerful. Yet the verse says something amazing. Inside that simple clay jar, God places treasure. That means something incredibly valuable is hidden inside something that appears ordinary on the outside. And that is exactly how God often works through people. From the outside, a person may look completely normal. Nothing about them may appear extraordinary. They may not have the loudest voice in the room. They may not have the most influence or recognition. They may even struggle with weakness, doubt, or fear. But God does not measure people the way the world does. The world looks at appearance. The world looks at status. The world looks at talent, power, and popularity. But God looks deeper than that. God looks at the heart, and He often places His greatest power inside people who seem the most ordinary. That is the meaning behind the treasure in jars of clay. You may feel fragile sometimes. You may feel like you are not strong enough or important enough to carry something significant. You may even look at other people and think that they are better prepared, more talented, or more capable than you. But the truth is this: the power was never meant to come from you. The power comes from God. That is why the verse says the treasure exists to show that the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us. The purpose of the clay jar is not to impress people. The purpose of the jar is simply to carry what God places inside it. And when the treasure begins to shine, everyone understands where the power truly came from. This truth explains something else many people experience in life. If you carry something valuable, you will often face pressure. Clay jars are fragile, and life can feel like constant pressure pressing against them. There may be seasons where you feel stretched, challenged, or tested in ways that others do not seem to experience. But pressure often reveals what is inside. In the same chapter, Paul continues describing the life of someone carrying this treasure. He says they may be pressed on every side but not crushed, perplexed but not driven to despair. In other words, the jar may face pressure, but the treasure inside cannot be destroyed. This is why some of the battles you have faced may have felt different from the struggles of others. The enemy does not fear what is empty. The enemy fears what carries purpose. When someone carries spiritual treasure, opposition often follows, not because they are weak, but because something powerful lives inside them. Sometimes people misunderstand this. They think difficulty means something is wrong. They think struggle means they are failing. But many times, struggle simply means something valuable is being carried. Think about the stories throughout the Bible. Joseph carried a dream from God, but before that dream came true, he went through betrayal, slavery, and prison. David carried the calling to become king, yet he spent years hiding and running from danger. Paul carried the message of the gospel, but he faced persecution, prison, and hardship. Each of them was a jar of clay. From the outside, they looked vulnerable. From the outside, they faced weakness and pressure. But inside them was a treasure that could not be destroyed. And that treasure changed history. The same principle still exists today. God continues to place purpose inside ordinary people. He continues to use voices that the world might overlook. He continues to work through hearts that are willing even if they feel weak. You may not always see the treasure clearly in yourself. Sometimes it takes time for a person to recognize what God has placed inside them. But the presence of that treasure often reveals itself in small ways. It appears in the way your words bring hope to someone who is struggling. It appears in the way your faith remains strong even during hard seasons. It appears in the way your heart cares deeply about things others might ignore. These small signs often point to something deeper. They point to the treasure. The truth is, God does not need perfect vessels. He does not need people who feel completely strong or confident. What He looks for is a heart that is willing to carry what He gives. A clay jar does not need to be perfect to hold treasure. It only needs to be available, and when God places something inside a person, that treasure begins to shine through their life in ways they never expected. People may see only the jar at first. They may see weakness. They may see ordinary circumstances. They may see someone who looks no different from anyone else, but over time, the treasure becomes impossible to hide. The light begins to show, the purpose begins to grow, the impact begins to reach people in ways the jar alone never could. That is the mystery Paul was describing, a fragile jar carrying eternal treasure, a human life carrying divine power. And if you have ever wondered why you feel something inside you that cannot be explained, why you sense purpose even when you feel ordinary, the answer may be simple. You are a jar of clay, and God has placed treasure inside you. Chosen one, there is a battle happening around you that most people cannot see. It is not always loud, it is not always obvious, but it is real. And many of the struggles you have faced may not be as random as they seemed. The Bible explains this clearly in Ephesians 6:12. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. This verse reveals a truth that many people forget. The real battle in life is not only physical, it is also spiritual. People often think their struggles come only from visible problems. They blame circumstances, people, or bad luck. But the Bible teaches that behind many of the battles we face, there are spiritual forces at work. Life in many ways is a battlefield between light and darkness, between truth and deception, between the purpose God has for a person and the forces that try to stop that purpose from unfolding. Not everyone recognizes this battle. Many people live their lives without ever realizing that there is a deeper conflict happening beyond what they can see. But those who carry purpose often feel the pressure of that battle more strongly. If you have ever experienced moments where opposition seemed unusually strong, moments where peace was suddenly attacked, moments where confusion appeared exactly when you were moving forward, you may have felt a glimpse of this invisible battle. Sometimes the attack comes through doubt. A quiet voice begins to whisper questions in your mind. It tells you that you are not capable. It tells you that your purpose is not real. It tries to convince you that your calling is impossible. Other times, the attack comes through distraction. Life suddenly becomes crowded with noise, responsibilities, and pressure. Your attention is pulled in many directions, making it difficult to stay focused on what truly matters. And sometimes, the attack comes through discouragement. You begin to feel tired. The path ahead seems long. The progress you hope to see feels slow. And the temptation to give up begins to grow. These moments can feel personal, but they are often strategic. The enemy does not waste effort attacking what carries no purpose. Resistance usually appears where something valuable exists. That is why spiritual warfare often intensifies when a person begins to move closer to their calling. When someone begins to pray more deeply, distractions increase. When someone begins to walk in faith, doubt often appears. When someone begins to step into purpose, opposition may grow stronger. This pattern appears again and again in Scripture. Jesus himself faced intense spiritual battle before beginning his ministry. After being baptized, he was led into the wilderness where he was tested and tempted. The enemy tried to attack his identity, his trust in God, and his mission. But Jesus stood firm in truth. He answered every attack with the word of God. He refused to allow deception to shape his actions. And because he stood strong, the enemy eventually left. This story reveals an important lesson about spiritual warfare. The battle is not always fought with physical strength. It is fought with truth, faith, and spiritual awareness. That is why Paul later tells believers to put on the full armor of God. This armor includes the belt of truth, the breastplate of righteousness, the shield of faith, the helmet of salvation, and the sword of the Spirit. These are not physical weapons. They are spiritual defenses that protect the heart and mind during the battle. Truth protects against deception. Faith protects against fear. Righteousness protects the heart. The Word of God becomes a weapon against lies. When someone understands this, they begin to see their struggles differently. Instead of thinking every difficulty means failure, they recognize that some challenges are simply part of the battle surrounding their purpose. Instead of responding with fear, they respond with faith. Instead of giving up, they learn to stand firm. Standing firm does not mean life becomes easy. Even strong warriors face difficult moments, but it means the battle no longer controls the outcome. When a person understands the spiritual nature of the fight, they stop fighting the wrong battles. They stop blaming people for every problem. They stop letting fear control their decisions. And they begin to focus on the deeper truth behind what is happening. Peace becomes a form of resistance. Faith becomes a form of strength. Truth becomes a weapon against confusion. Over time, this awareness changes the way someone walks through life. They become calmer in moments of pressure. They become stronger in moments of doubt. They become wiser when facing opposition, because they know something others may not realize. The battle may be real, but it is not greater than the power of God. Darkness may try to surround a person, but it cannot overcome the light placed inside them. The enemy may attempt to slow a person down, but he cannot destroy what God has already decided to accomplish. And when someone learns to stand in that truth, the invisible battle begins to lose its power. Not because the battle disappears, but because the person facing it now understands who is fighting with them. God never sends someone into a battle without equipping them first. The same God who called you also stands with you. The same God who placed purpose inside you also provides the strength to protect it. So when resistance appears, do not assume something is wrong. Sometimes resistance simply means you are moving in the right direction, and the battle you feel is not proof of weakness. It may be proof that your purpose matters. Chosen one, if you study the way God works throughout history, you will begin to notice a pattern. It is a pattern that appears again and again in Scripture. God rarely chooses the people that the world expects. He rarely selects the strongest, the most famous, or the most impressive by human standards. Instead, God often chooses the overlooked. He chooses the underestimated. He chooses the ones people assume are too small, too weak, or too ordinary. And when God works through them, something powerful happens. The victory becomes impossible to explain through human strength alone. Everyone can see that the power came from God. This pattern appears many times in the Bible. One example is the story of Jael. Jael was not a soldier. She was not a general. She had no army, no title, and no position of power. In the eyes of the world, she was simply a woman living in a tent. But during a time when Israel was under threat, something unexpected happened. The enemy commander named Sisera fled from the battlefield and ran to Jael's tent, believing he had found a safe place to hide. Sisera was a powerful military leader. He had commanded armies and fought many battles. No one would have expected his story to end inside the tent of someone like Jael. Yet that is exactly what happened. While he rested, believing he was safe, Jael took a simple tent peg and a hammer. With tools that looked completely ordinary, she struck down the enemy commander and ended the threat. It was not a sword. It was not a spear. It was not a large army. It was a woman with a tent peg. God used someone no one expected to bring victory in a moment no one predicted. The message of the story is clear. God does not always use traditional strength. Sometimes he uses unexpected people in unexpected ways. Another powerful example is Gideon. When the angel of the Lord first appeared to Gideon, Gideon was not standing on a battlefield. He was hiding. He was threshing wheat in a winepress, trying to stay out of sight from the enemy. At that moment, Gideon did not look like a warrior at all. He looked afraid, uncertain, and weak. Yet, when the angel spoke to him, the message was surprising. The angel called him mighty warrior. Imagine hearing that when you are hiding from your enemies. Gideon did not see himself that way. In fact, his response was full of doubt. He explained that his family was the weakest in his tribe, and he considered himself the least important person in that family. By human standards, Gideon was the last person anyone would choose to lead an army, but God saw something different. God did not choose Gideon because he was already strong. God chose Gideon because he planned to show his strength through Gideon. Later, when Gideon finally led an army against the enemy, something unusual happened. Gideon gathered thousands of soldiers ready to fight, but God told him that the army was too large. At first, that sounds strange. Normally, an army wants more soldiers, not fewer, but God had a reason. If the army won with thousands of men, people might think the victory came from human strength, so God reduced the army again and again until only 300 men remained. 300 men against an army of thousands. By human logic, it looked impossible, but God gave them a simple strategy. Instead of traditional weapons, they carried trumpets, torches, and clay jars. In the middle of the night, they surrounded the enemy. Camp broke the jars, raised the torches, and blew the trumpets. The sudden noise and light created confusion in the enemy camp. In their panic, the enemy soldiers turned on each other and fled. The victory came without a normal battle. It was not the strength of Gideon's army that brought victory. It was God's strategy. Then there is the story of David. When the prophet Samuel came to anoint the next king of Israel, he visited the house of Jesse. Jesse brought forward 7 of his sons. Each of them looked strong and impressive. They looked like the kind of men people would expect to become kings. But God rejected every one of them. Finally, Samuel asked if there were any other sons. Jesse mentioned one more, but he did not even consider him important enough to call it first. The youngest son, David, was out in the fields watching the sheep. When David finally came inside, he did not look like a king. He was a shepherd boy, young, simple, and unnoticed. Yet God spoke clearly to Samuel. This is the one. David was anointed that day even though no one else expected it. Later, the same shepherd boy would face Goliath, the giant warrior who terrified the entire army of Israel. Goliath was massive, heavily armed, and trained for war. The soldiers of Israel were experienced fighters, yet they were frozen in fear. But David saw the situation differently. He did not look at the giant and think about how strong Goliath was. Instead, he thought about how powerful God was. David stepped forward with nothing but a sling and 5 smooth stones. One stone, one shot. The giant fell, and the entire nation was freed from fear. This is the pattern. Again and again, God chooses people the world overlooks. He chooses the woman with a tent peg. He chooses the man hiding in a wine press. He chooses the shepherd boy watching sheep. Why? Because when victory comes through people like that, everyone knows the power came from God. God does not need the most impressive person. He does not need perfect credentials or flawless strength. What he looks for is a heart that trusts him, a heart that is willing, a heart that believes God can work through weakness. When someone carries that kind of faith, God can do things that human strength alone could never accomplish. And that same pattern still continues today. Many people who feel overlooked may actually be standing in the same position those people once stood in. They may feel unnoticed, underestimated, or unqualified. But God has never limited himself to the people the world expects. He still chooses the unexpected. He still raises up the overlooked. And he still proves that victory does not come from human strength, but from his power working through those who trust him. Chosen one, when people hear the word weapon, they often imagine something physical, a sword, a shield, something strong and visible. But the weapons God places in the hands of his people rarely look like that. Most of the time, the weapons God gives are quiet. They are simple. They are things the world often overlooks. Yet in the spiritual realm, these things carry power. When God places a weapon inside someone, it does not always appear dramatic or obvious. Sometimes it looks like something ordinary, a gift, a trait, a part of your personality that you never thought was important. But when that ability is used under God's direction, it becomes something much more than a simple talent. It becomes a spiritual tool capable of changing hearts, shifting situations, and bringing light into dark places. One of the most powerful weapons a person can carry is their voice. Words may seem small, but they carry enormous power. The Bible reminds us in Proverbs 18:21 that death and life are in the power of the tongue. Words can break someone down, but they can also rebuild someone who feels lost. Some people carry a voice that encourages others when they feel weak. Some speak truth in moments when everyone else remains silent. Some pray with authority that brings peace into situations filled with fear. To the world, these words may sound simple, but in the spiritual realm, truth spoken with faith can break chains that have held someone captive for years. Another weapon God places in people is faith. Faith is not simply believing when everything is easy. Real faith appears when circumstances look impossible. It appears when someone chooses to trust God even when the outcome is uncertain. There are people who carry this kind of faith naturally. When others panic, they remain calm. When others give up, they keep believing. Their confidence in God becomes a source of strength for everyone around them. Faith like that moves mountains. It opens doors that logic alone cannot open. It reminds people that hope still exists even in the darkest moments. Another powerful weapon is mercy. The world often values revenge. When someone is hurt, the natural response is to return that pain. But mercy breaks that cycle. Mercy chooses forgiveness when anger feels easier. Forgiveness is not weakness. In many cases, it requires more strength than retaliation. When someone releases bitterness and chooses compassion instead, something powerful happens inside their heart. Mercy destroys chains that hatred tries to build. It frees not only the person who is forgiven, but also the person who is carrying the weight of resentment. Another spiritual weapon many people overlook is tears. In a world that celebrates strength and control, tears are often seen as weakness. But before God, tears can become a form of prayer. Moments when someone cries out to God with a sincere heart carry deep spiritual power. Those tears represent surrender. They represent honesty. They represent a heart that refuses to hide from the truth. The Bible speaks about God collecting the tears of his people and remembering them. Tears shed in prayer can become seeds that later grow into healing, restoration, and breakthrough. Another weapon is presence. Some people carry a peaceful presence that changes the atmosphere of a room without them saying much at all. When they enter a difficult situation, calm follows. When someone is hurting, their presence alone provides comfort. This happens because the presence of God is working through them. Not everyone needs to speak loudly to make an impact. Sometimes simply being present, listening and standing with someone during a difficult moment can change everything. Another form of spiritual weapon is creativity. Creativity is often treated as entertainment, but it can carry much deeper meaning. Songs, stories, art, and ideas have the ability to reach places that ordinary conversation cannot reach. A song can comfort someone who feels alone. A story can help someone understand truth in a new way. A piece of art can express hope where words fail. God often uses creativity to communicate with hearts that might never listen to a sermon or lecture. Another powerful weapon is hospitality. Opening your home, feeding someone who is hungry, welcoming someone who feels forgotten. These actions may seem simple, but they carry deep spiritual meaning. Hospitality tells people they matter. It reminds them they are not invisible. When someone creates a safe place where others feel loved and accepted, something powerful happens. Walls begin to fall, pain begins to soften, hope begins to return, and finally, there is courage. Courage is the ability to stand firm when fear tries to silence you. It is the strength to speak truth when others remain quiet. It is the decision to do what is right even when it costs something. Courage inspires people. When one person stands up for truth, others often find the strength to stand as well. The world changes because of people who refuse to let fear control them. The important thing to understand is, this God does not give everyone the same weapon. Some people are called to speak. Some are called to encourage. Some are called to create. Some are called to lead quietly through love and service. Each weapon looks different, but every one of them matters. You may look at your gifts and think they are too small to make a difference, but when something is placed in your life by God, it is never small. When used with faith and obedience, even the simplest ability can become a powerful instrument. A voice can change a life. Faith can move a mountain. Mercy can break generations of pain. Creativity can awaken hope. The world may overlook these things, but heaven does not. And the weapon God placed inside you was never meant to stay hidden. Chosen one, sometimes the moment of activation does not arrive with bright lights or a dramatic announcement. Many times it comes quietly in an ordinary moment where you are simply asked to respond. There was a moment in my own life when this truth became very real. One evening I was with someone who had been struggling deeply with depression. This person had carried a heavy darkness for years. They had tried many things to escape it. They had spoken with counselors, taken medication, and searched for answers in many places. But nothing seemed to bring lasting peace. You could see the weight in their eyes. You could hear it in their voice. It was the kind of sadness that sits deep in the soul. As I listened to them speak, I felt something stirring inside me. A quiet prompting that I should pray for them and speak words of life over their situation. But immediately, another voice appeared in my mind. It said, "Who are you to do this?" I began thinking about all the reasons I might not be the right person. I was not a trained therapist. I did not have a degree in psychology. I did not have years of professional experience helping people through mental struggles. The more I thought about it, the more unqualified I felt. And that is a moment many people experience when they stand at the edge of activation. The calling may be clear, but fear begins to speak louder than faith. The mind starts listing every weakness. You do not have enough experience. You do not know enough. Someone else would do this better. For a moment, I almost stayed silent. It would have been easier. It would have been safer. No risk of saying the wrong thing, no fear of looking foolish. But then something shifted inside me. A simple thought came to my heart. Stop focusing on what you do not have. Use what God has given you. That moment changed everything. Instead of thinking about my limitations, I began to focus on the truth that God can work through ordinary people. I did not need perfect knowledge or impressive credentials. What mattered was obedience. So, I began to pray. At first, the words were simple. I asked God to bring peace into the person's heart. I asked Him to break the weight of darkness that had been covering their life. Then something unexpected happened. As I continued speaking, new words began to flow. Words about identity, words about purpose. Words reminding this person that their life still had value, that their story was not finished, and that the lies they had believed about themselves were not the truth. I could see something changing as I spoke. The heaviness in their expression began to soften. The tension in their face began to fade. Tears began to fall, but these tears felt different from the sadness they had carried before. These were tears of release. For years, this person had felt trapped inside a dark place. But in that moment, something began to break. The atmosphere shifted. The hopelessness that had surrounded them for so long began to lift. And suddenly, they were crying not from despair, but from relief. It was as if a chain had been unlocked. What shocked me most about that moment was how simple it was. There were no perfect speeches. There was no dramatic performance. It was simply a moment where someone chose to obey the quiet prompting of God. That experience taught me something I will never forget. God's authority does not depend on human qualification. God's authority works through human availability. When someone makes themselves available, God can move through them in ways they never expected. Many people think they must become extraordinary before God can use them. They believe they must reach a certain level of knowledge, experience, or spiritual strength before they are ready. But the truth is that God often moves through people long before they feel ready. Moses did not feel ready when God called him to lead Israel. Jeremiah said he was too young to speak. Peter doubted himself many times. Yet God still used them, because what God looks for is not perfection. He looks for willingness. The moment you say yes to what God is asking, something begins to move. Sometimes the change happens slowly. Sometimes it happens instantly, but every act of obedience creates space for God's power to work. Looking back at that moment, I realized something important. If I had listened to fear, nothing would have happened. If I had waited until I felt perfectly qualified, I might have waited forever. But because I chose to act in faith, someone experienced freedom. That is the power of activation. Activation is the moment when faith moves from thought to action. It is the moment when a person stops questioning whether they are capable and simply responds to what God is asking them to do. And many times the greatest breakthroughs happen in those simple moments. A prayer spoken with sincerity, a word of encouragement offered at the right time. A step of courage when fear tries to hold you back. These moments may seem small at first, but in the spiritual realm they carry enormous weight, because when someone becomes available, heaven begins to move through them, and the same possibility exists in your life. You may not feel qualified, you may not feel ready, you may even feel uncertain about what to say or do, but the truth is, this God does not need perfect ability. He needs a willing heart, and when that heart says yes, the power that flows through it can change lives. Chosen one, after hearing everything up to this point, there is one question that now stands in front of you. It is not a complicated question. It is not a theological debate. It is a simple decision. What will you do with what you now understand? Many people hear messages about purpose and feel inspired for a moment. They feel encouraged, maybe even moved emotionally. But after some time passes, life returns to normal. The feeling fades and the message becomes just another memory. But moments like this are not meant to end that way. Sometimes a message becomes a turning point, a moment where something shifts inside a person, a moment where they begin to see their life differently than before. You may not feel completely different right now. You may still have the same questions and the same circumstances around you. But something deeper may already be happening. Awareness is growing. You are beginning to realize that your life carries more meaning than you once thought. You are beginning to see that the struggles you faced may have shaped you for something greater. And you are beginning to sense that the gifts inside you were never placed there by accident. But awareness alone is only the beginning. The next step is decision. Every person who ever stepped into their purpose eventually faced a moment where they had to decide whether they would move forward or stay where they were. Abraham had to decide whether he would leave the familiar land he knew. Moses had to decide whether he would return to Egypt and confront Pharaoh. Esther had to decide whether she would risk her life to speak for her people. Each of them stood at a crossroads. On one side was safety, comfort, and the familiar path they already knew. On the other side was uncertainty, risk, and the calling that God had placed before them. The decision they made shaped the rest of their lives. And the same kind of decision often appears in every generation. For you, the decision may not look dramatic from the outside. It may not involve kings or armies. But inside your life, it may feel just as important. You may need to decide whether you will continue doubting the purpose within you or begin trusting that God truly placed something meaningful inside your life. You may need to decide whether fear will continue guiding your choices or whether faith will begin to lead your steps. You may need to decide whether you will remain silent about the truth you carry or whether you will allow your voice to be heard. These decisions often begin with small actions. A conversation you have been avoiding, a project you have been postponing, a step of obedience you have been quietly resisting. Small decisions often lead to large transformations. When someone decides to trust God with one step, that step often opens the door to the next opportunity. And slowly, the path that once looked impossible begins to unfold. Many people imagine purpose as a single dramatic moment. But in reality, purpose usually grows through a series of faithful steps. One step of courage, one step of obedience, one step of trust. Over time, those steps form the journey of a life that aligns with God's plan. So, if you feel something stirring inside you right now, do not ignore it. That stirring may be the beginning of something important. It may be the moment where a person stops seeing themselves as ordinary and begins to recognize that their life carries divine intention. You do not have to solve everything today. You do not have to understand every detail of the future, but you can make one simple decision today. You can choose to move forward. You can choose to trust that God did not place purpose inside you by accident. And you can choose to take the next step, even if it feels small. Because sometimes the smallest step of faith begins the greatest journey. And the moment you begin walking in that direction, something powerful happens. The same God who placed purpose inside you begins guiding the path ahead. Doors you could not open alone begin to open. Strength you did not know you had begins to appear. And slowly, the life that once seemed ordinary begins to reveal the deeper story that heaven had written all along. Chosen one, your story is not finished. In many ways, it may just be beginning. Chosen one. There is a moment that comes after every revelation, after every message that awakens something inside the heart. It is not the moment of inspiration. It is not the moment of emotion. It is the moment of decision. Because hearing the truth and responding to the truth are two very different things. Many people hear messages about purpose calling destiny and faith. For a brief moment, their hearts feel stirred. Something inside them feels alive. They begin to imagine that maybe their life truly does carry meaning, that maybe the struggles they went through were not wasted, that maybe God truly placed something important inside them. But after the message ends, life continues as usual. Responsibilities return. Doubts slowly creep back in. The voice of fear begins to whisper again, and the moment that once felt powerful slowly fades into memory. But the moment you are standing in right now was never meant to fade. It was meant to confront you with a simple but powerful question. What will you do with what you now know? Because once truth is revealed, the heart cannot pretend it never heard it. Once purpose begins to awaken, something inside you refuses to go back to sleep the same way it did before. The truth is that every person who ever walked into their calling eventually faced this exact moment, a moment where the path ahead became visible enough to take the first step, but still uncertain enough to require faith. Abraham stood at this moment when God asked him to leave the land he had known his entire life and walk toward a promise he could not yet see. Moses stood at this moment when God told him to return to Egypt and confront the most powerful ruler of that time. Esther stood at this moment when she realized that remaining silent might protect her comfort, but could cost the lives of her people. David stood at this moment when a giant stood on the battlefield mocking the armies of Israel, while every trained soldier around him remained frozen in fear. None of them had perfect clarity about the future. None of them felt completely prepared. None of them knew every step that would follow the first one. But each of them understood something important. There comes a point where waiting becomes another form of fear. There comes a point where hesitation becomes the only thing standing between a person and the life they were created to live. And that is why decision becomes the turning point of every calling. You may be waiting for the moment when you finally feel ready. You may be waiting until your confidence becomes stronger or until your circumstances feel safer. But the reality is that readiness rarely arrives before obedience. Most of the people God called did not feel ready when the moment came. Moses said he could not speak well enough. Gideon believed he was the weakest person in the weakest family. Jeremiah believed he was too young. Peter doubted himself many times, even after walking with Jesus. Yet God still used them. Not because they felt strong, but because they eventually chose to move forward, despite their weakness. That is the nature of faith. Faith is not the absence of uncertainty. Faith is the decision to trust God even while uncertainty still exists. Faith is the willingness to take a step when you cannot yet see the entire road ahead. And that is where many people hesitate. They want to see the entire path before they begin walking. They want guarantees before they move. They want complete understanding before they obey. But God rarely reveals life that way. Instead, He reveals the next step. And once that step is taken, the next one becomes visible. Purpose unfolds step by step, decision by decision, moment by moment. The Israelites did not see the waters of the Jordan River divide until their feet actually touched the water. Peter did not experience walking on the water while he remained inside the boat. The miracle appeared after the step of faith, not before it. In the same way, the calling inside you cannot fully come alive while it remains hidden in hesitation. The gifts God placed inside your life were never meant to remain buried beneath doubt. Your voice was not meant to remain silent forever. Your faith was not meant to remain inactive. Your compassion was not meant to remain unused. Somewhere in the world, there are people who need the very thing God placed inside you. There are hearts waiting for the encouragement only you can speak. There are situations waiting for the courage only you can show. There are moments waiting for someone who is willing to act when everyone else remains quiet. And the truth is that many people underestimate the impact of a single decision. They imagine that changing the world requires something dramatic or extraordinary. But history often changes because one person chooses to do what others were too afraid to attempt. One person decides to speak when silence was easier. One person decides to forgive when bitterness felt justified. One person decides to step forward when everyone else stepped back. That is how transformation begins. It rarely begins with perfect conditions. It begins with courage in imperfect circumstances. It begins with someone choosing faith instead of fear. And that is the decision standing before you now. Will you continue to see the calling inside you as something distant and uncertain, or will you begin treating it as something real that deserves your obedience? Will you continue waiting for confidence before taking action, or will you allow action to build the confidence you have been waiting for? Because Confidence often grows after the first step, not before it. The first step may feel small. It may feel quiet. It may even feel insignificant compared to the vision you imagine in your heart. But small steps often carry enormous power. A conversation you finally decide to have. A prayer you finally decide to speak. A project you finally decide to begin. A truth you finally decide to stand for. These steps may seem ordinary, yet they can change the direction of a life. Because the moment someone stops resisting their calling and begins cooperating with it, something begins to shift in the spiritual atmosphere around them. Doors that once felt locked begin to open. Opportunities that once seemed impossible begin to appear. Strength that once felt absent begins to grow. Not because the person suddenly became extraordinary, but because they chose to align their life with the purpose God had already prepared. That is the power of alignment. When a person's choices begin to match the direction God has placed in their heart, progress becomes possible in ways that once felt unreachable. And slowly, the life that once felt ordinary begins revealing something deeper. A story that was being written long before the person realized it. A purpose that had been quietly forming beneath the surface of everyday experiences. The struggles you faced begin to make sense. The lessons you learned begin to connect. The gifts inside you begin to find the places where they were always meant to be used. And when that happens, a person begins to experience something many people spend their entire lives searching for. They begin to experience alignment between who they are and why they exist. That alignment does not remove every challenge. Life will still bring obstacles, uncertainty, and moments of difficulty. But the difference is that those challenges no longer feel meaningless. They become part of a journey that carries direction and purpose. And that is the invitation placed before you now. Not an invitation to perfection, not an invitation to instant success, but an invitation to begin walking in the direction God has been quietly pointing you toward. You do not need to see the entire path. You only need the courage to take the next step, because the same God who placed purpose inside your life is also the one who walks beside you as that purpose unfolds. And the moment you begin moving forward in faith, you may discover something surprising. The life you were searching for was never somewhere far away. It was waiting on the other side of the decision you were afraid to make. Chosen one, once a decision is made, the journey truly begins. The moment you choose to step toward the calling God placed inside you, something changes. Not everything around you will suddenly become easy, and the path will not always be clear. But something within you begins to align in a new way. You are no longer standing still between doubt and purpose. You are moving. And movement is where transformation begins. Many people imagine that once they say yes to their calling, everything will instantly fall into place. They imagine clarity, confidence, and success arriving all at once. But the reality of walking in a calling is usually quieter and more gradual. Purpose grows the same way a seed grows in the ground. It begins small, it begins hidden, and for a time it may even appear as if nothing is happening at all. Yet beneath the surface, roots are forming, strength is developing, direction is slowly taking shape. That is how many callings unfold. The first steps may feel simple. Sometimes they may even feel ordinary. You may begin by speaking words of encouragement to someone who needs hope. You may begin by helping someone who feels forgotten. You may begin by sharing your faith in small conversations. These moments may not look dramatic from the outside, but they carry deep meaning. God often builds great things through small acts of obedience. The world celebrates sudden success and visible influence, but heaven often works through quiet faithfulness. A person who consistently shows love, courage, and integrity begins to shape the lives around them in ways they may never fully see. Consider how many powerful movements in history began with small actions. A teacher who encouraged a student at the right time, a person who refused to accept injustice, a voice that spoke truth when others remained silent. These actions may have appeared small at first, but their impact grew far beyond what anyone expected. Purpose works in a similar way. The calling inside you may begin affecting people one life at a time. A conversation here, a decision there, a moment of kindness when someone needed it most. These moments accumulate. Over time, they begin forming a path that reflects the purpose God placed within you. But walking in your calling also requires perseverance. There will be days when you feel confident and strong. There will also be days when doubt tries to return. The enemy often attempts to discourage people once they begin moving in the right direction. Thoughts may appear telling you that what you are doing is too small, too slow, or not important enough. In those moments, remember this truth. Faithfulness matters more than visibility. God does not measure success the way the world measures it. He looks at the heart. He looks at the willingness to continue doing what is right even when recognition is absent. Many of the people God used powerfully in Scripture spent long seasons walking in quiet obedience before the world noticed their impact. Joseph spent years in prison before rising to leadership. David spent years as a shepherd before becoming king. Jesus himself lived 30 years in ordinary life before beginning 3 years of ministry that would change the world. The lesson is simple, but powerful. The timing of God is different from the timing people expect. Purpose unfolds according to divine timing, not human impatience. As you walk forward, you may also discover that the gifts God placed inside you begin to grow stronger. Abilities that once felt small begin to develop with use. Confidence begins to replace hesitation. The more you act in faith, the more natural it becomes to trust the direction God is leading you. Think of it like a muscle. A muscle becomes stronger through movement and practice. In the same way, faith grows stronger through action. Every step of obedience strengthens your trust in God. Every moment of courage increases your ability to walk in purpose. You may also notice something else. As you move forward, people around you may begin to change. Some will feel encouraged by your example. Your courage may inspire them to pursue their own purpose. Your kindness may restore hope in someone who is losing faith. Your willingness to speak truth may give others the strength to do the same. In this way, the calling on your life does not only affect you, it influences everyone connected to you. Your life becomes a ripple that spreads outward. Each act of faith creates waves that reach farther than you realize. And this is why your decision matters. The world is not only shaped by large events or powerful leaders. It is shaped by individuals who choose to live according to the purpose placed within them. Each person who walks in their calling adds light to a world that often feels dark. That light may appear in simple ways. A person who chooses honesty in a dishonest environment. A person who offers compassion where cruelty has become normal. A person who stands for truth when deception is easier. These acts may not always receive applause, but they carry eternal value. Over time, walking in your calling begins to reshape your life. The confusion that once filled your mind becomes clearer. The restlessness you once felt begins to transform into direction. Instead of wondering why you are here, you begin to see how your life connects to a larger purpose. And perhaps the most important change happens within your heart. Fear loses some of its power. You realize that you do not need perfect circumstances to live with purpose. You only need the willingness to continue trusting God step by step. The same God who guided you to the moment of decision continues guiding you as you walk forward. Even when the path becomes difficult, you are not walking alone. God walks with those who trust Him. He strengthens those who feel weak. He guides those who seek direction. He provides wisdom when choices become difficult. And every step you take in faith becomes part of a story that is far greater than one single life. Chosen one, your journey will not always be easy, but it will be meaningful. The calling placed inside you was never meant to remain hidden. It was meant to grow, to influence, and to bring light into the places where darkness once seemed stronger. So continue walking, continue trusting. Continue using the gifts you have been given even when the results appear small at first. Because purpose rarely announces itself with loud noise. It grows quietly through faith, courage, and obedience. And as you continue walking forward one step at a time, you may begin to realize something powerful. The life you once questioned is becoming the very life you were created to live.